Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on today's Solo Flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, because there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, I'm going to start today's solo flight off with a story that comes straight out of the blaze. Former Texas congressman and multiple times failed presidential candidate Ron Paul has come out on Fox Business Network's program Varney and Company to lambast Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz. He claims that he has more in common with Hillary Clinton than with either Trump or Ted Cruz. Now, this is a bit of a shocking statement, but shocking statements are nothing new to the rather controversial former Texas congressperson. Remember, back when he ran for president during the 2008 and 2012 election cycles, he made a lot of people uncomfortable with his stance with respect to foreign policy. Apparently, Ron Paul suffers from the lingering ostrich syndrome. And what I mean by that is he's more willing to stick his head in the sand than he is to admit that there are real foreign policy problems and threats which currently face America and her people. After all, this whole notion that America was what caused 9/11 was something that didn't sit well with the vast majority of the American citizenry. Nor do I blame them for taking that stance. It was a completely moronic position for Ron Paul to take. But Ron Paul's history is checkered, with his connections of trying to get special interest payments for his own constituency that goes back to his long tenure of serving in the House of Representatives. Not to mention his swinging from the Libertarian to Republican Party at differing times. Now, as Jeremy and I have both reiterated on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, we are not necessarily allegiant to the Republican Party, nor do we support those who sit there and say it's a bad thing if a détente member of the gutless opposition party is thrust into the position of nominee. It is very important to pick and choose the candidate that best represents your personal interests. After all, that is part of your duty as an individual popular sovereign, and it is a requirement of our representative Republican form of government. No one has the right to tell you how to vote, because that is your fundamental and unalienable right. And as you are well aware, our rights end where another's begins. That's just point of fact of how our system works. Nevertheless, I found some of this pointed criticism aimed at Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz by the former congressman rather laughable. To say that he has more in common with Hillary Clinton just goes to show how misguided Ron Paul really is. And folks, never forget just how outlandish his criticisms were of American foreign policy. Whether or not the Iraq War was a mistake, and whether or not we were mistaken to get involved in the Middle East, that's beyond the point now. We're there, and it must be taken care of. You see, that's the difference between an adult that recognizes the real responsibility of leadership and somebody who is just so off the walls that he isn't suited to try and run for president. That's why I think the American people made the right decision in not giving him the nod for the gutless opposition party, or GOP, nomination for president, either in 2008 or 2012. But now he's attempting to say that Cruz doesn't hold libertarian positions, and that in fact he is owned by the investment bank Goldman Sachs. This is a criticism that we have seen leveled against Cruz by both those in the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, by New York billionaire and real estate mogul Donald Trump, and by various other elements within this election cycle. And I think that it's a bit disingenuous. No, it's more than a bit disingenuous. This is complete and total intellectual disingenuousness on the part of the former Texas Republican congressman. How can he say that someone who is pushing to go back to strict adherence to the fundamental tenets that are contained within the four corners of our shared Constitution is not at least remotely libertarian? You know, folks, this comes down to a game of semantics once again. The libertarian spectrum is quite wide-ranging. You have those that claim to be libertarian socialists, and I do have a point to get to with that here in a minute. And then you have those that are completely for liberty on all ends. Ultimately, the only label that really matters is that of constitutionalist. Because as we all know, the Constitution, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, makes no bones about what is actually the supreme law of the land. And as a nation of laws, not of men, we should be paying strict adherence to our shared Constitution. Yet that means little to nothing to Ron Paul. I honestly think this man is off his rockers. And it's probably a good thing that he is no longer within the halls of Congress. His son is a lot better than he was. And his son did give it a good go at trying to secure the nomination. That said, he has recently dropped out, and there is a trend of former Rand Paul supporters switching their support from the now defunct campaign of the Kentucky senator to the Texas Republican senator, Ted Cruz. This makes sense, because when you look at their actual approach to any and all of this, it comes down to the Constitution, as it absolutely should. That is the supreme law of the land, and as Jeremy and I have reiterated since our first episode, which aired on September 11th, 2015, it's whenever this country divorces itself from strict adherence to the Constitution that we begin to bear witness to the sorts of moral decay and societal decay that are plaguing the United States. After all, what is the major complaint that most of us have with respect to the current regime under the leadership of Barack Hussein Obama? It's that he is ignoring the Constitution, that he leaps from one constitutional crisis to another, spinning this country around the drain of death, destruction, and depravity. And yet, we see that the Democrat Party, which is ruled by Fabian socialists, are pushing for more of the same. They want to accelerate the pace at which Obama was going about his so-called fundamental transformation of the United States. And yet, we also see that the former Texas Congressman Ron Paul had some nice things to say about Bernie Sanders. He said that he's come up with some libertarian ideas when it comes to removing crony capitalism. I find that laughable. The reason I find that laughable is that his proffered solutions is the complete destruction of the open and free market. That is a quintessential part of the American libertarian. That is, those who adhere to the Constitution, believe in strict adherence to it, and demand that all levels of government return to that strict adherence. But apparently, Ron Paul has missed the memo on that. he's jumped onto Crazy Train and is just leaving on the expressway without any sense as to what he is spewing out of his mouth. Nevertheless, I want to reach out to the Rand Paul supporters who are now looking for someone to throw their lot in with. You know that Ted Cruz has been a defender of the Constitution ever since he became licensed with the State Bar of Texas. At a very young age, he went before the Supreme Court and argued some very difficult cases in front of the highest court in the land and secured victories. And in each of these victories, he was a stalwart defender of our shared Constitution. But above all, he was a stalwart defender of our fundamental and unalienable rights. When you look at the way that the United States of America was formed, at the foundation of it all is the complete recognition that each American citizen is endowed by their Creator with certain fundamental and unalienable rights. Now, what exactly does that mean? It means that those rights are written on our hearts. They're part of the natural law tenets that underpin our entire representative Republican form of government. But more importantly than that, it means that those rights cannot rightfully be taken away by any earthly authority without true due process under the law. Perhaps Ron Paul should take a moment to do some remedial reading on the Constitution. It might do him some good, because if he were to go out on that limb and actually live up to the rhetoric that he used to adhere to, he would see that Bernie Sanders is diametrically opposed to our shared Constitution. In fact, Noid face boy me Sanders is more akin to a Fabian socialist and a Marxist than he is to anyone who claims to strictly adhere to the United States Constitution. After all, this is a man who is a self-avowed, so-called democratic socialist. And as our first air marshal has pointed out before, that when you look at the supremacy clause of our shared Constitution, you will note that any form of socialism is diametrically opposed to the clear and concise language of the Constitution. Therefore, socialism is void ab initio. It is completely incompatible with our representative Republican form of government. Therefore, it is also against the supreme law of the land. Folks, it really is as simple as that, and I'm baffled as to why Ron Paul would be reaching out, throwing this venomous hatred towards Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz. To say that he has more in common with Hillary Clinton goes to show that maybe Ron Paul isn't quite the libertarian that he claims to be. It shows that his ostrich syndrome has spread and gone terminal. Perhaps it has now done irreparable harm to his brain by repeatedly sticking his head in the sand and ignoring the facts of life. But not just the facts of life. He has completely ignored and turned a blind eye to the facts of governance, to the real threats that are facing the United States of America. I would fear to see what his response would be to the Islamic State or ISIS. You know, folks, we as popular sovereigns must absolutely proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and unalienable rights, and therefore saying that we have anything in common with those who would do anything to tear our Constitution apart corner by corner is not an ally of freedom. Now, I know that this may sound like a very serious charge that I am levying against the former Texas congressman, but I'm weary of this Cruz derangement syndrome that I'm seeing on the part of many within the realm of politics. This is political kabuki theater at its worst. Perhaps Paul is trying to keep himself relevant, or else he's angry that his son's campaign just wasn't able to catch on. There's a lot to praise about what his son has done, for some of the stances that he has taken, and clearly for his support of Ted Cruz when he was filibustering. And let's not forget that Ted Cruz also supported Rand Paul when he was filibustering. These two men actually took a firm stance and attempted to defend our Constitution in a time when rampant unconstitutionalism was reigning supreme. This was, after all, when the Democrat Party, the party of Hillary Clinton, and now apparently the party of Bernie Sanders as well, were doing everything to be an obstructionist party. And you know, what's so amazing about that is that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media tried to convince the people that it was actually the Republican Party that was serving the role as obstructionist. Yet, as we all know, nothing could be further from the truth. It was Harry Reid that refused to enact bills or bring them up for a vote. He was doing his damnedest to protect the Emperor Obama from any negative publicity or negative political blowback. But we are now in a different situation. We now have a complete majority control of both houses of Congress, and we are vying to take control of the highest office in the land, that of President of the United States. Yet the people are tired, frustrated, and angry with politics as usual. The status quo has achieved nothing. In fact, the acts of Senate Majority Leader Mitch the Turtle McConnell and Speaker of the House Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan has only led to strengthening the position of Barack Hussein Obama. You know, President Obama should be in what is known as the lame duck period of his regime. That is, he is on his way out. He should be ineffectual, and America should be looking forward to blazing a new path into the future. Yet, with the gutless opposition party, or GOP, we see that he has been empowered by their spinelessness, their fecklessness, and their unwillingness to take a firm stance against him. And you know, folks, I think that a lot of this is rooted in the fear of the cancerous doctrine of political correctness. Ever since President Obama first assumed the reins of political power way back in 2009, the race card has been hovering over the gutless opposition party. Those that fear the power of the salivating mainstream media are simply terrified, petrified, and incapable of responding to those attacks. And folks, let's face it, those attacks are frivolous in nature. They are basically wearing that card down to threadbare ruination. And the reason they're doing that is they see that it is a powerful crux to use to turn off people's mental faculties. They throw out these meaningless, shallow, empty, and hollow platitudes in the hopes that it will turn the debate into a form of character assassination. And you see, folks, that's why I lament, basically, what is essentially the death of civil discourse in this country. It is as though those who are within the political classes are completely ignoring the idea of reasoned argument. Of course, with the Fabian socialists, they don't want reasoned arguments. They know that they cannot win in the marketplace of ideas. They are completely intellectually bankrupt when it comes to notions such as liberty and freedom. Why? Because they are diametrically opposed to those true characteristics of the national character, heritage, spirit, and above all, identity of America. And so you see, that's why there is this concerted effort to attack someone who would stand up for and firmly defend our shared Constitution. Ted Cruz has shown time and again that he absolutely believes that the Constitution belongs to the American people, as he should. That is the way that our founding fathers intended it to be. After all, if you recall, they expected us to proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and unalienable rights so that we would be able to hand down the Constitution as a birthright to all of posterity. There is no getting around that. There is no mincing words with respect to that. That is absolutely what they said, what they meant, and that is what we should be doing. You can find it in their writings, whether it be the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, the various correspondences between all of our founding fathers. You know, they didn't agree on everything, but the one thing they did agree upon was the fact that each and every one of us, as American citizens, are endowed by our Creator with certain fundamental and unalienable rights. This is why Ted Cruz is absolutely correct when he says that the Constitution is the cornerstone of everything with respect to American polity. American polity has always been based on this revolutionary idea that has separated us from every other nation on earth. It was this type of strict adherence to the natural law principles that underpin our entire representative Republican form of government that allowed the United States to shoot to such lofty heights in its relatively short yet illustrious history. And it also explains why history is such a powerful, meaningful, and relevant teacher with regards to how to achieve proper governance. You know, when you hear someone like Ron Paul, who used to claim that he believed in strict adherence to the United States Constitution, throw his lot in behind Bernie Sanders on some of the things he said, it makes you question whether he ever had a principled stance with respect to the Constitution. Now, I'm sure that he means only in small areas, but to say that he has more in common with Hillary Clinton, who is basically wanting to continue the march towards balkanization and employ the tactic of divide and conquer to further strip away the sovereignty from the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty, the real popular sovereigns in this country, we the people, is just out of line. It's totally against everything that we believe. And so it goes to show that maybe this is more of a personal shortcoming on the part of the Texas congressperson. I'm not trying to disparage him here. I just find his statements to Steve Varney over at the Fox Business Network to be rather questionable. And I mean, when you look at some of the stuff that he has said, it is beyond belief. He was saying that basically by being married to a woman who works for Goldman Sachs, that Cruz is owned by a bank. Well, folks, again, this just further emphasizes why I say that the only litmus test that should be used in determining whether or not a candidate is qualified to wield the reins of political power in this country is the Constitution. Where in the Constitution does it say that you sell your soul if you take loans to run for office? This goes to a point that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, made on one of our past episodes of the Wright Flyer, that one of the true beautiful aspects of our open, representative Republican form of government is that anyone can run for political office. But basically, what Ron Paul is saying here is that if you lend money, or if you are associated with anyone who's related to a bank, then that automatically disqualifies you. That means somehow you're owned by the bank. Well, that's almost like the notion of guilt by association, or guilt by the corruption of blood, or familial ties. And that's diametrically opposed to not only the letter, but also the spirit of the supreme law of the land. This is why I say that Ron Paul should probably take a moment and do some remedial reading with respect to the Constitution before he levels such aspersions against a truly committed constitutional conservative. The constitutional conservatives in this country and the libertarian movement in this country should have more in common with Ted Cruz than they do with Hillary Clinton. And if his attack against Ted Cruz is based on this notion that he has borrowed money from Goldman Sachs, then how can he say he has more in common with Hillary Clinton, who is accepting money from foreign donations? Now, there is something that should raise the alarm. But it doesn't seem to cross the mind of Ron Paul, assuming he still even has a mind. I think Ron may be a little senile, or else he's just completely off his rockers. I don't know, Ron, what's the matter with you, but let me give you just a little piece of advice here. Stick to talking about the Constitution, evaluating the Constitution. Truly evaluate what's contained within the four corners of that sacred document. Then compare the positions that Hillary has taken over her long career in government, and compare it with the principled stances that Ted Cruz has taken, and then get back to me. I think that your allegations here are totally unfounded, and they go against the letter and the spirit of the Constitution. Guilt by association is not something that should ever be recognized as a disqualifier, especially when the great weight of the evidence clearly indicates that Ted Cruz has done everything that he has promised that he would do, that he has been a strict adherent to the United States Constitution, and is therefore the most principled candidate and most qualified candidate to be the GOP nominee for the highest office in the land. Now, folks, I must once again stress that I am not telling you in any form or fashion how to vote. That is not my place. I do not have the right to do so, just as you do not have the right to tell anyone how to vote. You may explain why you support a candidate, but when you start crossing over into the territory of trying to tell someone how to exercise their fundamental and unalienable rights, you are beginning to walk a dangerous tightrope towards infringing upon their fundamental and unalienable rights. That is something that we should do our utmost to avoid, because this is a representative republic. And being a representative republic means that it absolutely must recognize the sovereign rights of the individual. Those are those fundamental and unalienable rights that have been endowed to us by our Creator. So, when you are cautioning, you're okay, but it seems that you are damn near approaching that line, getting ready to step over it, telling people not to vote for the Texas Republican senator. Let me caution you, Mr. Paul. The American people are a lot smarter than what you're giving them credit for. They have done their research. They are tired of politics as usual, and they want to see this country set on a corrective path that will unlock them from the chains and shackles of an overhanded, heavy-handed, and tyrannical government. That is the joint goal of anyone who supports liberty, of anyone who believes that the United States is a nation of laws, not of men. And then for you to then claim that not only one, but two adherents of socialism, tyranny, despotism, and oppression, two candidates vying to become New Age potentates in the United States, have more in common with you than you have with Ted Cruz, that should truly turn your stomach, sir. Because if you are a principled libertarian, you would despise anyone who is attempting to clamp down upon your fundamental and unalienable rights. You would be diametrically opposed to anyone who wants to expand the scope, power, presence, and influence of a centralized government. That goes against everything that our founding fathers held near and dear. It truly is violative of our shared Constitution, which is why, once again, I think you should take a moment to do a bit of remedial reading when it comes to respect of our Constitution. Ted Cruz has been consistently conservative. He has always stood up for the constitutional rights of the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this country, we the people. All you have to do is look at his case of Van Orden v. Perry, where he protected the free exercise of religion with respect to a monument to the Ten Commandments located on the Texas state capitol. He did that at a very young age. His commitment and devotion to our shared Constitution has not ever wavered. That is the reality that we have to admire. But when you look at Hillary Rotten Clinton, she wants to engage in balkanization. She wants to say that this fictitious war on women is a very real thing, while at the same time supporting more and more flooding of our country with so-called and supposed Syrian refugees that adhere to a religion that thinks of women as chattel property. I think that we already know that she has less in common with the Constitution and even less in common with constitutionally minded popular sovereigns than Ted Cruz. And that is my take on the matter. Folks, at this juncture, I want to turn my attention to another whiskey tango foxtrot moment in the arena of American politics. On Friday evening, former Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal came on to the Fox News Network, to throw his endorsement behind Marxist Rube-i-o, the failed presidential contender and now termed out governor for the state of Louisiana. Came out and said that he is supporting Marxist Rube-i-o's bid for the White House because he believes he is a principled conservative. I'm assuming the man who once claimed that the Republican Party was the party of stupid for supporting the detente wing of the gutless opposition party has a very short memory. He forgets that Marxist Rube-i-o betrayed the Tea Party wing that helped push him into his Senate seat in Florida back in the first wave of Tea Party vengeance in 2010. After all, that was the time when the Democrats controlled the White House, the House of Representatives, and the United States Senate. So, Marxist Rube-i-o was at one time considered to be the darling of the conservative movement. He was considered a rising star and the new face of the Republican Party. Then he threw his lot behind Chuck Schumer and the Gang of Eight in their comprehensive amnesty bill of 2013. Indeed, Chuck the Schmuck Schumer even went so far as to claim that Rubio was the principal architect behind the bill. That betrayed the conservative movement that put him into office in the first place. He turned his back on the law, including the supreme law of the land, the United States Constitution, in order to score a few cheap political points. And I believe that this past is continuing to haunt him as he vies for the nomination for President of the United States. But the thing that really amazed me about what Bobby Jindal said when he appeared on Fox News to throw his weight behind Rubio was that he believed that he was a man that could unite the Republican Party. Really? He could unite the Republican Party when one of the greatest stances right now of the conservative movement is to end this torrent of illegal aliens flooding through our porous southern border? It absolutely makes no sense. It's completely contradictory to his party of stupid statement, and it shows that he has chosen to jump into that wing of the party. Yet, Bobby Jindal is not alone in being one of the failed contenders for the GOP bid for the White House who has decided to throw his lot behind Marxist Rube-i-o. The other one is former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. Now, remember, Santorum was unable to get any traction in this election cycle. And I think that has to do in no small part to the fact that he had proposed a nationwide minimum wage of $15 an hour. That would kill small businesses. It would cause unemployment to skyrocket as employers struggled to cut the fat from their businesses in order to ensure their survival and future viability. You see, this is the problem, folks. Again, he's saying he's a principled conservative, yet, like Rick Santorum, he provided no true accomplishments on Rube-i-o's part other than to say he's a principled conservative. Again, this is why I dislike, actually detest, these sorts of hollow, meaningless, and empty platitudes that have become the sort of bumper sticker politics that dominates the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the mainstream media's coverage with respect to this presidential campaign. No longer is it about the lofty principles and constitutional application of the candidates that matters. No, it's how many can rack up as many sorts of empty platitudes as possible to increase their candor with the American electorate. But this sort of pandering is not what the country needs right now, particularly when you consider that our sovereignty is under greater threat now than it has ever been. The American people are tired of the status quo when it comes to politics, and the detente wing of the gutless opposition party is handing us more of the same crap that we've heard year after year that leads to nothing other than pure collaboration with the Fabian socialists on the left, which continues to push this country further and further away from strict adherence to the fundamental principles of our shared Constitution. You know, it is something that Jeremy and I have reiterated time and again on the Wright Flyer, that the key and solution to the problems that are facing this country right now is right in front of us. In fact, it has been with us since the very inception of this country over 200 years ago. It is our shared Constitution. The Constitution outlines, defines, and demands the proper scope and application. The mandates of the Constitution should be strictly adhered to, and whenever anyone steps from outside the scope and application of government as demanded by the Constitution, they should be brought to immediate accountability for straying. I don't mean this in a Stalinistic sort of way, but at this point, when we are at such dire circumstances in this country, we need a principled constitutionalist. Now, that may sound similar to the worthless diatribe that was spilled by former Governor Jindal to the Fox News channel, but there's meaning behind a principled constitutionalist. That means someone who stands up for, in ardent fashion, and defends our shared Constitution. It means that the candidate must absolutely understand the Constitution and work to ensure that the Constitution is strictly adhered to. Unless and until we come together, realizing that the Constitution is the key, then we are going to continue to see the country spin into the sorts of chaos and decay that plagues it currently. But that seems to go above the head of Bobby Jindal. Now, what's laughable is then Rubio came out and claimed that Bobby Jindal is one of the smartest people in American politics today. Obviously, he can't be that smart if he's throwing his support behind somebody who is an open borders candidate, someone who absolutely wants to endorse amnesty and doesn't really want to fix the tax code that is strangling the life out of not only American small businesses, but also the American middle class. It seems that he and Ron Paul have joined forces in boarding the train to Crazy Town together. They're on the expressway to complete and total oblivion and irrelevance, and it is nothing more than their own fault. The reason I say that it is their own fault for this is that they are ignoring the true track record of a constitutionalist. You know, in this age where we're facing die-in-the-wool statists who completely embrace the Fabian socialist model and those who are strict adherents to the Constitution, you can really tell who cares about the popular sovereigns in this country, that being we the people, and who is been bought off. I believe that Bobby Jindal has essentially been bought off by some sort of promise by Rubio. The same can be said with Sarah Palin and her strange endorsement of New York billionaire and real estate tycoon Donald J. Trump. You know, all of the statements that she made with respect to Cruz playing dirty in Iowa on her Facebook page are just absolutely insane. And then for that stance she took throwing her son out as some sort of political prop when he is clearly going through some sort of personal crisis was beyond belief. Now, I'm not casting any aspersions towards Track Palin, but I am questioning his mother's judgment with respect to bringing that up. All American servicemen should be respected, and that means that they should not be used as political props for a candidate who has been consistently inconsistent in this 2016 presidential election cycle. And I say that because when you look at what she's doing, it is absolutely out of line with the positions she held in the past. It's pandering of the worst sort, and it shows that she's putting herself up to sale to the highest bidder. And for what? To avoid irrelevancy? You see, folks, this is the problem. No longer are we looking for leaders. Apparently, when we are facing the worst threat to our sovereignty, we are out looking for entertainers. Perhaps the real reason that Sarah Palin threw her lot behind the Donald is because they had both been the chief stars of a reality TV program. Whatever it is, it's all rubbish. Again, if we want to see this country succeed, and we want to see a renaissance, a true renaissance kindled in this country, we must turn to a constitutional originalist. Strict adherence to our shared Constitution is the only way that we are going to see the people be released from the heavy chains of bondage to statism. That's right, folks. The federal government is encroaching upon our fundamental and unalienable rights at an alarming rate. They do so each and every day. It motivates them from their waking hour until they go to bed at night. And since many work in shifts, we know that the federal government never sleeps. It works to continue to spread like a cancer on the body politic of the United States. And yet, when it's finally shown that we have a true constitutionalist vying for the candidacy of the GOP, we have subterfuge. We see the Fox News network getting in bed with the amnesty wing of the party, and this is due to Rupert Murdoch's personal vendetta to gain some sort of open borders policy to drive wages down in this country. And then we see those who should be naturally aligned with us because of our principled constitutional stance throw their lot behind a man who, up until he decided that he'd throw his hat into the arena to run for president, had been a committed Fabian socialist, say that, well, I like Ted Cruz, but he's ineligible to run because he's not a natural-born citizen, ignoring the clear statutory language that states otherwise. Of course, in this instant, I'm speaking of Ann Coulter. Now, Ann Coulter has had questionable selections for who should be the next president before. Back in 2012, she threw her weight behind Mittens Romneykins. And if anyone is as far divorced from an ardent constitutionalist as you can get, it's Mittens Romneykins. Look, folks, as Jeremy and I have said on past episodes of the Wright Flyer. The economy, per se, meaning by itself, in and of itself, is unimportant. The reason we say that is because the weak and stagnant economy is but a symptom of the larger problem that afflicts the United States of America today. And that problem is this wide gap between the Constitution and the way in which the federal government is currently running. This is something that cannot be ignored. It is something that is an integral part of the problem, and is something that must be addressed swiftly and immediately. But we have the likes of Sarah Palin, Ann Coulter, Bobby Jindal, Ricky Sanatorium, all throwing their weight behind Marxist Rube-i-o, who was willing to open our borders to all of these illegal aliens, to give them a pathway to citizenship and not to secure the border. Then he comes out and says that no, he's now heard the people and that he's for closing the border first, then providing a pathway to citizenship. Hey, Marco, here's a thought. Why don't we throw out those who entered into this country illegally, tighten up the border, and follow the Constitution? That's a thought. That's a thought that you seem to have a problem with. It's a thought that goes against everything that you stand for, and therefore you're standing in stark opposition to the supreme law of the land, our shared United States Constitution. Marxist Rube-i-o also displays one of the worst characteristics of the detente wing of the gutless opposition party. And that is, he will say one thing to one audience and another thing to another audience, showing that he has no core principles whatsoever. You know, it's that sort of duplicity and duplicitous action that has alienated so many of the American citizens away from the electorate that they are just fed up. They are throwing their hands up saying, at this point, my vote doesn't even matter anyway. Folks, don't give up your fundamental and unalienable right to vote. Take a principled stance. There is a constitutional conservative out there who is willing to defend your fundamental and unalienable rights. He's willing to take the steps that are necessary to bring this country back to the corrective path so that you are freed from the chains and shackles of bondage to this tyrannical, heavy-handed, overbearing federal government. But he needs your support. And that candidate is none other than Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz. Folks, it's so open and obvious that it's baffling as to how these people can be so blinded to the truth. It shows that people like Bobby Jindal want to continue the push towards the type of rank and rampant corruption that is gripping the parts of all government, whether it be municipal, county, state, right on up to the federal level. But then again, with respect to Bobby Jindal, perhaps it makes sense. He was the steward over Louisiana. And let's face it, Louisiana has had a history of corrupt politics. But the people of Louisiana are salt of the earth people, and they too, like the rest of us, are sick and tired of the political elites trying to thumb their nose at the true popular sovereigns in this country, and I think that this is just a dying cry of a man whose candidacy for the President of the United States of America got absolutely no traction, so to speak. He was unable to break even, and so he's out, just like Rick Sanitarium, just like Mike Huckleberry, and just like Rand Paul. But what I can say with respect to Rand Paul is at least he did stand up for the Constitution. He may not have done it in as ardent a fashion as Ted Cruz, but I do admire his candor to stand up to the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, and his willingness to filibuster for what he believed in. That shows the type of character and spirit of the American people that has been so sorely missed and lacking as of late. This is why I think that Ted Cruz is once again the best choice. But as I have said, and as I am going to repeat now, I am not in any way, shape, or form attempting to tell you how to vote. That would violate the great principle that my rights end where your rights begin. But I do ask that you examine the respective and prospective candidates vying for the position of nominee for the gutless opposition party with a constitutional lens, because we must absolutely use the Constitution to determine whether or not the candidate is actually qualified to wield the reins of political power in this country. Because everywhere we turn, we see that the Constitution is being ignored. You know, it speaks to that phenomenon that is absolutely gripping the institutions of higher education in this country, the so-called Million Student March, and their attempts to clamp down on the First Amendment free speech rights of fellow students. They want to control what people say. They want to shame people who disagree with them. How can that be contributive to the marketplace of ideas? Since when did the marketplace of ideas become a Politburo for Fabian socialism? Well, according to Zygmunt Dobbs, this is a problem that we have seen going back well over a century. The Fabian socialists have basically infected the traditional institutions of the United States. They're working tirelessly to tear apart our moral fiber and compass, and they are also working to destroy the very foundation of stability, which is the natural order of government. And you know, that's the most amazing thing about the natural order of things. We speak of government, and we think of it as being lofty and detached from our day-to-day lives in some form or fashion. The federal government has pushed so hard to separate itself from the electorate and popular sovereigns that it appears to be this nebulous, wholly independent form and entity unto itself. But based on the natural order of things, government starts with the family. The family is the fundamental building block that creates a safe, nurturing, and stable environment to rear the next and up-and-coming generations who will eventually wield the reins of political power in this country. And from there, it moves up to the municipal government, to the state government, to the federal government. There absolutely is a hierarchy to government, and the ultimate power, at least by the way that our founding fathers intended, rests with we the people. That is part of why our fundamental and unalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, form such a significant cornerstone of our representative Republican form of government. It is something that has been ignored by the nefarious Fabian socialists that have gripped both the Democrat Party and the salivating mainstream media. The graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are doing their utmost to replace the American sovereigns with those who have no connection with our country, that have no knowledge of the short yet illustrious history of the United States, and swear no allegiance to our constitutional system. That is a major problem. But it is a problem that has been building for well over half a century. Indeed, it's been over a century. We see that the tactics of William Randolph Hearst, the father of yellow journalism, are continued through rampant sensationalism in media coverage, in openly biased coverage on even supposed conservative information media outlets. I'm speaking, of course, of the News Corp's control of the Wall Street Journal and Fox News. Rupert Murdoch's stance here is staggering. He's pushing to replace the American with illegal aliens. Why? Why does he want to fundamentally transform the country? It's because I believe Deep down, he really is an ardent admirer of Fabian socialism, and I believe that the detente wing of the gutless opposition party is slowly turning that way as well. Part of the problem is that the Chamber of Commerce is seeing a way to divorce people from business. They want to have cheap labor so companies can grow, but ultimately it seems nonsensical and contradictory. The reason I say this is if you destroy the middle class, the very base of consumers that our entire economy is based upon, to purchase from these companies. It's asinine that they would accept these positions, but it goes to show that whenever you divorce yourself from the Constitution, rampant corruption overtakes the ability of those who wield the reins of political power and those who vie to control those who wield the reins of political power from the truth. It blinds them to the truth. And the truth is that you have to have a strong, robust, free people that are self-autonomous, self-responsible, and self-accountable in order to maintain a free economy. And you know, this is what our foes during that long, drawn-out Cold War, from the end of World War II until the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, said. There was no way that an outsider could destroy the United States. Rather, socialism, in the guise of Fabianism, would eventually take hold in the United States and spread like cancer. That is what we are seeing. Their results are alarming and staggering. They have achieved more than was previously realized. And that just means that now more than ever, we must be willing to take a firm stance against those nefarious elements that push us closer and closer to the brink of ruination and oblivion. And that means that we must also support a true, principled constitutionalist who has a proven track record of standing up for the Constitution. That is why Jeremy and I have endorsed Senator Ted Cruz for president. We know that he has these principled stances. We know that he has stood up for, defended, and protected the Constitution time and again. That is the sort of principled leadership that Bobby Jindal should have supported. But we see now that he clearly does not adhere to that he has his own ulterior motives that motivate him to throw his lot behind Marco Rubio. But let me also send out a dire warning to the former Louisiana governor. In no way, shape, or form will Marxist Rube-i-o ever unify the party. True constitutionalists know that he's a sham. He's a fraud. He has done everything in his power to embrace the detente wing of the gutless opposition party. Folks, do not let this man pull the wool over your eyes, because he is the sort of feckless politician that led to the sorts of problems we're facing right now. And when we are in such dire straits as a nation, that is truly the last person we should support. But if you choose to support him, all I ask is once again that you analyze him through a constitutional lens to determine whether his political stances are consistent with the Constitution. You know, folks, the entire purpose of what we are attempting to achieve here at the Wright Flyer is to empower you, to give you the tools to expand upon your fluent and working knowledge of our shared Constitution and thereby your fundamental and unalienable rights. In so doing, you empower yourself to see the truth and to learn those in the framework of government who are doing everything in their power to further drive a wedge between the Constitution and the operation of government. I believe this is something that cannot be ignored. That is why I am sitting behind this microphone speaking to you right here and right now. Everywhere we turn, we see the deleterious results the negative impacts of turning away from the Constitution, moral decay, the incessant attacks upon our traditions and our institutions, and for what? Increased balkanization, the division of the American people so that these feckless Fabian socialists can come in and radically transform what it means to be an American? I don't think that's proper, nor do I think this is a nativist stance. In fact, I know that my stance is clearly one of constitutionalism. I respect that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and I expect our political leaders to do the same. I do not expect them to roll over and not stand up and fight for the Constitution. And again, folks, this explains why I am wary with respect to Donald J. Trump. When he says that his main thing is the art of the deal, and yet he rewrites it to be the art of the squeal after losing in Iowa, that is not the sort of person I want to be the next president. Our Constitution is not up for sale, and our fundamental and unalienable rights are non-negotiable. That is a simple fact. It is something we cannot get around, and unless and until we realize that, we are going to continue to see this sort of feckless infighting that plagues the conservative movement in the United States. Unlike the Fabian socialists, we don't goose-step in a singular direction. But if we want to rekindle this country and to spark a renaissance in this country, we have got to return to strict adherence to our shared Constitution. As I had promised earlier in the show, I'm going to get into that comparison with so-called libertarian socialism. So what Ron Paul was saying is that Bernie Sanders has some of his libertarian views with respect to getting crony capitalism out of Wall Street. But the whole thing is that libertarian socialism, which I actually believe is a true oxymoron, is based on this notion that, yes, you're free from government, that there is no government at all, but that money is a form of bondage and governmental tyranny. And so basically that is the type of libertarianism that perhaps Ron Paul was mentioning with respect to Bernie Sanders. Of course, I have trouble accepting that as an argument. And the reason that I have trouble accepting that as an argument is that it really has no place in a constitutional representative republic like the United States that places a high value on private property. You see, the libertarian socialist is bordering on communism in so much as they say you only own the necessities that you have, your house, your clothing, and even then the house is still collectively owned. And they are also diametrically opposed to the fundamental building block of society, that being the family. Like I said, that is a part of the natural law, the natural order of things. You have to have the family, to keep the rearing of children steady and stable. That's just an integral part of humanity. And that's why the left is always against humanity. It's because they don't believe in these fundamental tenets that are an integral part of a functioning society. That makes them dangerous. And that is why I say it is so important for us all to have a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution, because in so doing, we are able to see for ourselves what forms the truth and what is not the truth. And therefore, again, it's just rather questionable and dubious on the part of Ron Paul to go all out like that and to oppose the natural order of things. And so it makes me question his libertarianism. And I've always questioned it a little bit because he seems to also believe that we just need open borders. I believe in a type of libertarianism that respects the Constitution, which defines the country. That is the quintessential classical American libertarianism. And so, again, it's all down to the semantics of how one looks at this or at how one defines the terms. But nevertheless, it is not something that can easily be swept under the rug. But we see now just exactly who is and is not in favor of that which is good and right in this country. And with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I'm Randy Wright, your captain, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, I also extend to you a cordial invitation to join my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and yours truly, the next time we take off over the friendly airwaves, providing you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment unlike any other radio program or venue. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Hope to see you next time. Do take care.